The whine of tires on asphalt, the roar of an engine pushed to its limit, a woman behind the wheel, her face etched with a desperate kind of freedom. This is Aileen Wuornos, and this is her highway to hell. How did a woman abandoned by her family, abused by life itself, become one of America's most notorious female serial killers? Was she a victim turned predator, a monster born of neglect, or something far more complex? We journey into the heart of darkness, peeling back the layers of a life scarred by trauma, fueled by rage. This is the story of Aileen Wuornos, a woman who walked the line between victim and executioner. Aileen Carol Pittman, later known as Aileen Wuornos, entered the world on February 29, 1956. Born into a world already fraught with challenges, her arrival was anything but a joyous occasion. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, was just a teenager herself, overwhelmed and unprepared for the responsibilities of motherhood. It was a birth marked by tragedy, as Diane abandoned Aileen and her older brother Keith just a few years later, leaving them in the care of their grandparents. This early abandonment was a foreshadowing of the darkness that would come to define her life. Aileen's father, Leo Dale Pittman, was a convicted child molester who was incarcerated at the time of her birth and later committed suicide in prison. Abandoned by her mother and with a father she never knew, Aileen's childhood was a brutal tapestry of neglect and abuse. Her grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos, became her legal guardians, but they were far from the loving figures a child needs. The Wuornos household was a place of turmoil and instability. Aileen's childhood home was a dilapidated house, a physical representation of the neglect she experienced. The overgrown yard and broken swing set were silent witnesses to her suffering. She was failed from the very beginning, explains Dr. Dorothy Lewis, a renowned psychiatrist specializing in violent crime. The lack of a stable home life, the sexual abuse she endured, these things leave an indelible mark. The emotional and physical scars from her early years were deep and unrelenting. Aileen often found herself alone, staring out of windows, yearning for a different life, one where she was loved and cared for. Aileen's grandparents, her legal guardians, were far from the loving figures a child needs. Lori was an alcoholic who was often violent, and Britta was emotionally distant, unable to provide the nurturing environment Aileen so desperately needed. Whispers of abuse, both physical and sexual, followed Aileen through her childhood. She was subjected to harsh discipline and cruel treatment, leaving her with a deep-seated mistrust of those around her. By the age of 14, she was pregnant, ostracized by her community, a pariah in the making. The father of her child was never identified, adding another layer of mystery and tragedy to her already troubled life. Aileen's childhood wasn't just troubled, it was a breeding ground for the rage that would later explode. The anger and resentment she harbored from years of mistreatment would eventually manifest in ways that shocked the world. Escaping the stifling confines of her hometown, Aileen felt a desperate need to break free from the chains of her past. The small town, with its quiet suburban neighborhoods and old-fashioned houses, had become a prison of memories and regrets. Aileen sought refuge on the open roads of America. She drifted towards Florida, a place she believed held the promise of a fresh start. The highways became her new home, each mile a step further from her old life. Florida, with its siren song of sunshine and opportunity, masked a darker underbelly. The sunny beaches and palm-lined roads were a stark contrast to the urban streets at night, where shadows lurked and danger was never far away. Life on the fringes of society awaited. Aileen found herself among the homeless and the forgotten, those who lived in the rundown areas and frequented the lonely diners. It was a harsh reality, but she was determined to survive. Survival became the name of the game. Every day was a struggle, a fight to find food, shelter, and safety. Desperation drove her to the edges of society where she scavenged and searched through trash just to get by. Aileen turned to sex work, a choice born out of necessity rather than desire. Standing on street corners at night, she faced the dangers of dark alleys and the unpredictable nature of those who sought her services. Selling her body to survive in a world that offered her little else, Aileen counted her earnings in small, dimly lit rooms. The money was never enough, but it was all she had to cling to in her fight for survival. It was a dangerous profession, one fraught with risks and constant threats. Harassment and altercations were common, and the flashing police lights at night were a reminder of the ever-present danger. This line of work exposed her to the worst of humanity. She often found herself crying alone, scared of the shadowy figures that roamed the streets. But amidst the darkness, a flicker of light appeared, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak existence. The flickering streetlights and the sunrise over the city symbolized a new beginning, a chance for something better. Tyria Moore, known as Ty, entered Aileen's life. Their meeting was serendipitous, a chance encounter that would change everything. They talked in parks and shared coffee, finding solace in each other's company. Ty, a hotel maid with her own troubled past, offered Aileen companionship and a semblance of normalcy. They spent time together in motel rooms, sharing their stories and dreams, finding comfort in their shared experiences. Their relationship, though mired in the complexities of their shared circumstances, blossomed into something beautiful. They held hands, walked together, and sat close in parks, finding moments of peace amidst the chaos. This bond offered Aileen a taste of love and acceptance she had long craved. They embraced, smiled at each other, and shared meals, creating a fragile but precious connection. However, this fragile bond would soon be tested in the fires of Aileen's escalating rage. The pressures of their circumstances and Aileen's inner turmoil threatened to tear them apart, leading to tense conversations and dramatic confrontations. The year was 1989. Aileen Wuornos, hardened by years of hardship and fueled by a simmering rage, crossed a line. Richard Mallory, a man with a history of violence towards women, became Aileen's first victim. The details, pieced together from Aileen's later confessions and forensic evidence, paint a chilling picture. Aileen, working the highways, encountered Mallory. What began as a transaction descended into a struggle, a fight for survival that left Mallory dead. Fear, adrenaline, a lifetime of pent-up rage. What drove Aileen to kill? Was it self-defense, as she would later claim, or was this the first terrifying glimpse of a darker impulse unleashed? Section 5. The Hunter's Game, a Pattern of Prey. The killing of Richard Mallory was not an isolated incident. Over the next year, Aileen Wuornos would claim the lives of 6 more men, each murder bearing chilling similarities. Her victims, often middle-aged or older, were all found shot to death along Florida's highways. A pattern emerged. Aileen would pose as a hitchhiker or solicit her victims for sex, luring them into a false sense of security before turning on them with deadly force. Her weapon of choice, a .22 caliber pistol. The killings, though brutal, were not random acts of violence. Aileen later claimed that each man had either attempted to rape her or had succeeded, her actions fueled by a need for revenge, for control in a life where she had known little of either. Section 6. Closing in, the net tightens. As the body count rose, so too did the pressure on Florida law enforcement. The highway killer case, as it became known, gripped the nation's attention. Police worked tirelessly, piecing together clues, interviewing witnesses, desperate to stop the reign of terror. A breakthrough came in the form of a car accident. Aileen, driving a vehicle registered to one of her victims, crashed into a guardrail. This seemingly minor incident would prove to be her undoing. Witnesses came forward, linking Aileen to the stolen car, placing her squarely on the radar of the investigation. Adding fuel to the fire, Tyria Moore, Aileen's lover, agreed to cooperate with authorities. Facing her own legal troubles, Ty made a fateful decision. She would elicit a confession from Aileen. Section 7. Judgment Day, Confession and Trial. The recorded phone calls between Aileen and Ty are chilling. Ty, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation, coaxes Aileen into confessing to the murders. Aileen, initially defensive, eventually breaks down, her words a mix of justifications and chilling admissions of guilt. Aileen's trial was a media spectacle. The prosecution, armed with forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Aileen's own confessions, painted her as a cold-blooded killer, motivated by greed and a thirst for power. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to portray Aileen as a victim, her actions a desperate response to a lifetime of abuse and trauma. They argued that she suffered from borderline personality disorder and PTSD, her judgment clouded by mental illness. Section 8. The Price of Freedom, Legacy of a Killer. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury ultimately found Aileen Wuornos guilty on 6 counts of murder. The courtroom was filled with a palpable tension as the verdict was read. The faces of the jury members were stern, reflecting the gravity of their decision. The judge too seemed to carry the weight of the moment, knowing that this case had captured the nation's attention, and would be remembered for years to come. She was sentenced to death. Aileen's time on death row was marked by contradictions. She was a woman who had lived a life of violence and chaos, yet in her final years, she sought a strange kind of peace. Her days were spent in a small, confined cell, a stark contrast to the turbulent life she had led on the outside. The isolation seemed to bring out a reflective side in her, one that was rarely seen during her years of freedom. She renounced her earlier claims of self-defense, declaring that she had killed her victims in cold blood. This admission shocked many, as it contradicted her previous statements and painted a picture of a woman who was fully aware of her actions. Her confessions were chilling, revealing a cold and calculated side that many had not seen before. It was as if she wanted the world to know the true extent of her crimes, to leave no doubt about her guilt. She embraced her notoriety, granting interviews and even selling the rights to her story. Aileen seemed to revel in the attention, using it as a platform to share her version of events. She became a media sensation, with journalists and filmmakers eager to capture her story. Her willingness to engage with the media added another layer to her complex persona, making her both a subject of fascination and revulsion. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection. The execution marked the end of a life that had been filled with turmoil and violence. It was a somber moment, witnessed by a few officials and marked by a sense of finality. The room was sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the heated emotions that had surrounded her trial in life. Her last words were a rambling statement that included a bizarre claim of being beamed up to a spaceship. These final words added an eerie and surreal note to her story, leaving many to wonder about her mental state in her final moments. It was a strange end to a life that had been anything but ordinary, a final twist in a tale that had already seen so many. The legacy of Aileen Wuornos is complex and unsettling. She remains a figure of both infamy and tragedy, a woman whose life and actions continue to provoke debate and reflection. Her story has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries and films, each attempting to unravel the enigma that was Aileen Wuornos. She was a killer, responsible for the deaths of 7 men. Her crimes were brutal and senseless, leaving a trail of pain and suffering in their wake. The families of her victims were left to grapple with their loss, seeking justice and closure in the wake of her actions. Yet she was also a product of horrific abuse and neglect. A woman failed by the very systems that should have protected her. Her early life was marked by instability and trauma, factors that undoubtedly shaped the person she would become. She was a victim long before she became a perpetrator, a fact that complicates the narrative of her life and crimes. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about societal inequalities, the cyclical nature of violence, and the blurry lines between victimhood and monstrosity. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to understand the deeper issues at play, and to question how we as a society deal with those who fall through the cracks. Aileen Wuornos' life and legacy serve as a stark reminder of the complexities of human nature and the consequences of a society that fails its most vulnerable members.